welcome to the Cloud Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm your host, Angelo Mandato, and today we're going to talk about validating your business plan. From my last episode, I mentioned creating a pre business plan, and today you're going to see how that kind of flows in with how you're going to validate your business plan. First, let's talk about informal research. So, when you first put together the pre business plan, you're kind of putting your ideas into it. Now we need to put some data behind it to justify what we're about to do. So, we're going to ask questions like does this service already exist? Um, who is going to buy it? And this will go into exploring your personas and how you're going to treat your customers and market to them. And in general, do you think this is just a good idea? So I kind of put in the blog notes, but basically, we want to see if the idea already exists. And then if it does, why is our idea better? If it doesn't exist, that's even bigger question is how are you going to get customers to use it? For example, the iPod is probably the best example that we can talk about today. When Steve Jobs came up with it, he already knew there were MP3 players on the market, but instead he decided to come up with a completely different brand and pitch it as um, a device that'll put all the songs in your pocket rather than saying here's the amount of storage. So that's the kind of things you're going to start thinking about too, is what makes it different. Also, we need to look and see, do you think this is a great idea or not? If you don't have a passion for this, if you don't think that the idea jives with what you want to do, it's time to stop. Maybe someone else will come up with it. It's fine. If you're not passionate about it, then you're about to go down a road that you don't want to go down. uh, what we want to do next, if you refer to the business plan, the pre-business plan that we talked about, is start asking questions. And what we'll want to do is meet with different people. The first round of folks that you talk to, like I talked about in the pre-business plan, is going to be your friends and family. Eventually, you're going to want to go beyond that. Remember, your friends and family are usually going to tell you what you want to hear. So the next batch of folks that you want to talk to are going to be kind of outside your tight circle. And what you're going to do is create research. That informal research that we used when we created the pre-business plan is now going to be something that we can measure in one way or another. With lean project process and lean company building, that we like to refer to this as quantitative and qualitative research. What that means is qualitative is when you and I are talking and I get the impression that I like to use or build software as a service, right? So, hey, if I have a service that helps someone in a software and a service business, I'm going to talk to Angelo. Um, that gives you insight. But um, quantitative is when we can actually start measuring the results when we get asked these questions or get feedback from people. So, a good example of qualitative will be obviously interviewing somebody, talking to them in person, um, kind of learning what someone's using. So a good example might be get putting someone in front of a computer and observing using your software. That'll give you uh, qualitative information, like, hey, the left corner of the screen, people like to click there. Maybe if I make the default button, more people will click it. Now, quantitative in that same token is measuring what's happening. So when you put out a survey and ask different questions, which there's a whole science to survey questions, I'm not going to get into that, but you want to try to get very well-rounded answers to kind of to give you the insight you need. Surveys are something we can quantify. We can add it up. We can get to a metric and say, hey, 50% of the customers are not being served today. My product will serve that sector or that niche. Going back to that button example, if you have a button at the top, you decided that it would make sense to put it there. So let's put it there. And now you're going to measure between the month when it wasn't there versus the new month that it's now there. And you're going to have proof to say, hey, when we put the button in the top right corner, we're getting more clicks by 20%. So let's move forward with the whole UX UI design changes where we always put the most important button at the top right corner. So that kind of gives you an idea how that qualitative and quantitative, and I'll be talking about that more um, down the road as once we launch a service, because we're going to measure. We're going to ask people for feedback, and we're going to measure what's happening in the interface, in the service, in the checkout process, everything. And that's going to help us steer us into making better decisions. Another step that we're going to want to do when you're planning your business, before you create your business plan, is come up with a SWOT analysis. So SWOT stands for um, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And really, what we're doing is we're kind of putting together, um, and if we see a template of this, which I think I have one right here, when you see a template of this, it's basically broken down into quadrants. So hopefully this is in the camera okay. And the example that I got is Netflix, and they use different things to say, hey, do we want to switch from being a CD distributor or CD rental company to an online streaming rental service? And they had a lot of things that they had to contemplate, including that they didn't do that business before, and that might be a weakness. A threat is that there's other services also trying to stream, so why would they be better? And the opportunity, obviously, is they already had a customer um, base that they can easily switch over, or at the same time provide streaming services. So this particular example, the company already exists, but you're still going to kind of use these kind of tools to decide, hey, is it worth the risk to do a business? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What things could threaten me, like a competitor? What other opportunities are there? For example, a new law that might come out that will make it easier for you to do business. And then the last part is creating a feasibility study. Now, some entrepreneur books and getting started businesses, they really put a lot of emphasis in this. And this is where, based on my experience with creating a product vision board, that's for Scrum development, as well as a um, um, business model canvas, that you might not want to spend a lot of time on the feasibility study, because really what you're creating is a report based on everything else we just gathered at the top, plus results from surveys and results from talking to people on the street. Um, but you still need to create this, because until you create your business model canvas and then a business plan from that, this is it. This is your only other document that you can really kind of point to, when if you talk to someone, of where you're going with your business, what you plan on doing, and if it's possible. So this feasibility study or feasibility report, you're going to want to put things like a brief description, the technology you're going to use to chain it, and some revenue plans. Again, I wouldn't go too deep into it, but just where you might be able to obtain revenue, um, a basic outlook of the competition. Um, and then this is where the stuff that was in the pre-business plan that I talked about last episode stops. And now you're building a little bit further. Now you're going to talk a little bit about the team, some key people that you're going to be able to bring in, how your company's going to be structured, how you're going to get there, and then also create some basic timeline and milestones. And financials, you got to say, hey, this is where we're going to get funding, or this is how we're going to bootstrap it, or this is where we get to a certain phase with a MVP, and then we need to get funding. That kind of stuff, roadmap also on the money, on how you're going to get started. So if you can get through all that, and then you look at this feasibility study, go over it with a couple friends or colleagues, and they say maybe punch some holes in it or find some problems, it might be time to stop. Let's not go down this road. On the opposite hand, if you're looking at this thing and you're like, this is gold, this is definitely what we want to do next, then this is where you start to actually plan your business. And this is where you're going to create a product vision board, which I got one laminated here. And then you're going to create the business model canvas, which interestingly, I have an example of Skypes from Case Western Reserve University. It's quite interesting because they were deciding, do we want to, who are our customers? And it's kind of interesting to see. But you're going to then take this stuff that we just did in this feasibility study and start filling it in here and expanding on it. So you can kind of see um, the pre-plan. It's like you only spent an hour or two with it. With this next phase and getting to a feasibility study, you might take 2 or 3 days to recreate it. I wouldn't spend a lot of time on it. You're just trying to get to a point where you're saying to yourself or saying to your colleagues, is it worth moving forward? And hopefully you're at that point and it is. Then you start building things like this, the product vision board and your business canvas. So hopefully that's helps you on the next steps with creating a company. And also, I'm going to just throw out there, um, I am also in the process of starting a SaaS startup. The company is going to be called Logging Magic, and I'm now in the process of walking through these steps that we're talking about and setting up the company in the same way. So as the next couple months move, I will start talking more about my startup and how all the stuff that we're talking about in this show relate to it. Um, but until then, I'll just kind of start feeding the information of where I'm at. So, in actually where I'm at with Logging Magic is I'm just got to the point where I'm creating a product vision board and the business model canvas and putting together my team. So that's where the next 5 or 6 episodes that I dig into are really going to help pull everything together. All right. If you have any questions or thoughts or feedback for today's show or any of the episodes, please contact me. I can be reached at angelo@mandato.com or angelo at the Cloud Entrepreneur Podcast. I will double check that that works. And I will get back to you. And questions, if you're okay with it, just make sure you put that in the notes, that you're okay with me talking about you and your question on the show. And then I'll answer your question here on the show. All right. Until the next episode, have a good one.